Okay, we can move on to item number 4 while the votes are tallied. Item 4 is a public hearing, proposed amendment to the Land Development Code, creation of R1B and RNCB zoning districts. Recommendation is that City Council conduct the first of 2 public hearings on March 17, 2016 to consider the proposed amendment to the Land Development Code creating the R1B and RNCB zoning districts. Mr. Administrator, could you please ask the Planning Services Administrator to give us some background information?
Council President, Ms. Myers is, or I mean, I'm sorry, Freudian slip. Ms. Morris is prepared.
Thank you, Mr. Council President and members of Council. Over the course of several months last year, planning staff worked very closely with stakeholders in the Belmont Devilliers neighborhood to work on formulating not only zoning map amendments that would help the future land use map and the zoning map come into conformity, but to correct some changes that have been made during our last comprehensive plan update to the future land use map that the neighborhood wasn't happy with. So during that time, we were trying to do some consensus building, make something that the neighborhood would be happy with, and during the course of that, the conversation turned to some of our existing zoning designations and how they didn't quite fit some of our urban core neighborhoods, both in lot size and setback requirements, and in some of the permitted uses that the neighborhoods had concerns about. In those discussions, the recommendation was formed to create 2 new zoning districts that would not just apply to the Belmont Devilliers neighborhood area, but they would be available citywide. In the next public hearing that's coming before you, you will see these proposed zoning districts be proposed on the zoning map. They already will have corresponding future land use categories that exist, so they did not require amending our comp plan. They're going to fit into those existing future land use categories, but essentially we have come up with the R1B and RNCB zoning districts that accomplished quite a bit to satisfying the concerns of Belmont Devilliers, and we think most neighborhoods citywide that might have some of the similar concerns. Your planning board did unanimously recommend approval of this land development code amendment, and if it's approved, then the next public hearing, as I said, will have some of these zoning districts implemented on the map.
Can you just give a quick definition of what R1B and RNCB are?
Certainly. The R1B is going to be a medium-density residential district, similar to R1AA and R1A. The primary difference with that, there's not going to be any differences in land uses that are permitted. It's going to be lot size, setbacks, things of that nature. It'll give you a little bit more density, a little more urban character in development. The RNCB is just going to have a few more restrictions as far as land uses that are permitted as compared to your existing RNC zoning district. One notable exception, you'll see that retail uses exclude package stores, package sales of alcohol. That's a concern that we hear pretty frequently with neighborhood associations, that they would like some of those retail uses, but some of them they'd like to exclude, like standalone package sales. This zoning district accomplishes that. We went through use by use and struck the ones that they found objectionable, but it still maintains the character of RNC, having that neighborhood-compatible, retail-based zoning uses.
Okay. Other questions from Ms. Morris? I have 2 cards, and we won't be taking a vote on this. It's just for the first public hearing. Seeing no questions, Ms. Dubuisson, please come forward. You don't want to speak? Okay. Ms. Perry, would you like to come speak?
Beverly Perry, 622 West Belmont Street. As a homeowner in Belmont Devilliers, I participated in the recent zoning meetings about the neighborhood. I agree with the code and the map presented today and believe they come closer to fulfilling the long-standing neighborhood plans, especially the 2004 Belmont Devilliers neighborhood plan. which also had a lot of community participation and which is online for study. We, as residents, we can't control everything that's built around us, of course, but we can have an influence and hope that developers, builders will try to learn what this historic and unique mixed-use and residential neighborhood wants. I believe the zoning as presented had community input and helps us move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Perry. Okay, I have no other cards. Any comments? Thank you, Ms. Morris. I think you guys stay up there. Okay, item number 5 is public hearing, comprehensive plan zoning and future land use map amendments, Belmont Devilliers neighborhood area. Recommendation is that City Council conduct the first of 2 public hearings on March 17, 2016 to consider the proposed zoning and future land use map amendments. Mr. Well, he's not here. I'll just ask you.
Thank you, Mr. Council President, members of council. To dovetail off the previous item, this is the proposed map that coincides with those meetings that staff conducted with the Belmont Devilliers stakeholders over the course of the last several months of 2015. Your planning board has unanimously recommended approval of these changes. As you can see, this has a central core of more intense commercial uses surrounded by the RNC district. This is a future land use category that will coincide with the new RNCB that will be created if council approves that ordinance at the next meeting. And this item also will have 2 public hearings because we will be bringing the final round of the comprehensive plan-based amendments to you in April, and a final zoning map and future land use map to be adopted by reference. So you will have all of those concluded. Hopefully this will be a part of it. We did have one request for a property to be excluded. The neighborhood, I don't believe, had any objection to that. If council opts to exclude that property, the property owner's request for that block was included in your package. Essentially, it is bounded by Chase Street on the south, Gregory on the north, A Street on the west, and Donaldson to the east. And that was the only request for exclusion that we have on record, which I think is pretty impressive considering all the conversation and meeting and debate that occurred. We do have maps. You had quite a few maps in your package. I can go through any on an individual basis if you want, but this is the conclusion. This was the consensus that was reached.
Okay. Any questions from Ms. Morris? I have 2, maybe 3 cards. 2 right now. Grady Swan.
My name's Grady Swan. I have a property at 700 block of West Chase Street. Y'all have my package of information with the attachments?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Okay, good. The property that I own is at the block with the exception, and I'm here on behalf of the 100% of the owners of that block requesting an amendment to the future land use. We are requesting that instead of going RNC, we're requesting that the zoning be considered a commercial C2A. And if you take a look at the attachment 1, you'll see again where this property is located. It's near the southwest corner of the Belmont Devilliers neighborhood. And then you go to attachment number 2. That shows you the current future land use map for that neighborhood. The red represents commercial and the tan or yellow is residential. You'll see that 70% of that block is currently zoned commercial, and specifically is commercial C3. And C3 allows, with respect to lot coverage, is 100% of the property, whereas the RNC only allows 30% for commercial and 50% for residential. So you can see there's a significant reduction in lot coverage if we go to the RNC versus the commercial C3. Now, we understand the problems with the commercial C3 as far as the nuisance land uses. We don't have any problems with the RNC land uses, but we do have problems with the lot coverages. So to compromise, we're asking for the C2A designation. And that you'll see on attachment 3, well, what the city is proposing, the RNC. And if we go to the other attachments, you'll see that we've been working since December with the city planning staff and with the neighborhood group. We've met with the neighborhood group. We got 100% unanimous approval of our C2 zoning. And again, I've met with the city, and they said if we get the neighborhood to approve it, and we get 100% of the property owners to agree to that, then the city staff will support it. And the rest of the attachments show that we've gotten 100% of the property owners to agree to that zoning change. So that's pretty much my presentation.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Swan? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, John Bullock?
Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, council members, you're being asked to approve 16 future land use changes and 15 zoning changes in the Belmont Devilliers neighborhood. They are almost all good, logical, and protective changes. They are more protective than what you have now, with one glaring exception. Along North Rue Street, between Belmont and LaRua, there is a proposal to change it from residential to C3, the most intensive and some would say the harshest form of commercial use. This was, as you have heard, taken up in 2 workshops in which 369 notices were sent out to owners of property. My property is across the street. I was not sent a notice. I do not blame the city planner for that. She used city tax records, but city tax records lag behind reality, and so the former owner of that property received that notice. The logic dictates against a C3 as well. I asked city planner, why was this C3 recommended, this new C3? She said a woman named Dottie Dubison asked for it and did not give a reason. I asked Ms. Dubison myself later, and she could not come up with any C3 use that required this change of zone in this acre. But she said that Reverend Powell, an owner of part of this acre, would want it. I asked Reverend Powell, and he said he wanted to use that property for parking. That's not a C3 use, that's a C1 use. The position of this dictates against a C3 use. It is directly across the street from houses and directly across the street from the Henry T. Wire Children's Park, the only park in the Belmont Devilliers neighborhood. And a C3 use is not compatible with a children's park. The development has been going on for some time, and in 2010, the urban core plan said the broad definition of allowed uses in commercial zones, C2 and C3, have created incompatible adjacencies with residential uses of the Belmont Devilliers neighborhood. So I think you can see that there is no reason for C3, and it would be contradictory, perhaps destructive, of the Belmont Devilliers neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bullock. Ms. Dottie Dubison.
Well, I find it fascinating that staff says I asked for it, because I don't believe that I asked for it. I believe it was recommended that parcels were going to have a singular zoning. As we went through, we combined many properties that had previously had separate zonings into one single zoning, and it was agreed that the building which is on that property that is zoned C3, or 2/3 of the almost complete block, is already zoned C3. The parking lot is what remains that Mr. Bullock is so worried is going to be some noxious use abutting his property and the park. And I will say that I believe he spent time with Reverend Powell, and I believe he was present at least 2 of the 3 meetings that the community had, so he heard the community say that it was their intention that the 4 blocks in the core of Belmont Devilliers remain available as the cultural community center that they were at the time of the 2004 workshops that began this process. And we wanted to preserve the capacity for businesses, light manufacturing, which in C3 is allowed. Such things as the bakeries that deliver off-site could be allowed there. Currently, if we were able to get a bakery into that building, even the craft bakeries that we all love so much that sell food down at Palafox as Cottage Industries, they are not under the other zoning allowed to be on that site and sell off property. So we have tried to preserve the entire real estate piece as one. That was at staff's direction, not at my request, I don't believe. So I would question where that came from, and I would say that this whole process came about because staff first asked 4 individual citizens, myself included, who do not own, I do not own property in Belmont Devilliers, to sign off on a blanket rescheduling, and we insisted that we have the public meetings, which have merited such wonderful cooperation that a lot of people downsized their property and some people up-zoned their property in the process. But everyone talked about it in a very give-and-take situation. This property was discussed at the workshops. It was approved by the attendants at the workshop as being maintained as a full C3, and it was also brought up for discussion at the Belmont Devilliers Neighborhood Association meeting by Mr. Bullock, and no one recommended the change. So while Mr. Bullock, who has just recently moved into the neighborhood right adjacent to Henry Wyman Park, may not feel comfortable that Reverend Powell and Truth for Youth will keep his property values up, I can assure you that if Reverend Powell and Truth for Youth were not there right now, Mr. Bullock would not be able to walk into his front door at the same degree of peace and safety that he does right now because of the monitoring that Reverend Powell and his group bring. So I understand tonight's take a pot shot at the lady who runs down to sign up to try to share information with you, but I did want you to have the full information there. Thank you.
Ms. Dubuisson. Councilwoman Canada.
Yes, Mr. President, I just wanted to ask staff if parts of that property is C3 and some are not in it, as the person claimed.
Yes, I believe that there is a mix, but the overall intent was to go to a blanket commercial future land use, which commercial future land use can have C2, C3, C1. And I'd like to say I haven't spoken to Mr. Bullock. I haven't met Mr. Bullock, so I don't know what conversation occurred as far as any recommendation to that effect. But it is my understanding from our meetings that we had on several occasions with the neighborhood and the interested parties that was the consensus, was that C3 left these options available for some light manufacturing, some more wholesale type activities that the neighborhood did want to leave that opportunity available for.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Vice President Spencer.
Thank you. May I direct a question to Mr. Morris? All right, thanks. And I'm going to refer to her, Sherry. All right. Sherry, could we as a council take action to, say, impart limitations for footprints, building footprints of manufacturing facilities? How could we a C3 function, which I understand was just described, be more compatible with what is a neighborhood that I can understand there could be some advantages to having that C3 uses, job creation, proximity to those that live there, to be employees, but what could we do to make sure we're not sitting here one night hearing a neighborhood state objections with Reverend John Powell nowhere in the picture?
Councilman Spencer, There are limitations legally, what we can do, because we have to avoid contract zoning, where we're approving something that, a zoning designation that has conditions on it that it wouldn't have anywhere else in the city. But that being said, I mean, certainly if the neighborhood were open to it, there could be design guidelines put in place that place limitations on that commercial core. There are alternatives that we could work on developing in the code that could achieve that, but under just the typical cumulative zoning districts, you are limited to what it permits as far as, there's no minimum or maximum lot size. Lot coverage is pretty well 75% or more typically. Substantial building height and mass, and that is indiscriminate of use. So that would be, the less, I guess, neighborhood friendly uses and the ones that the neighborhood might want to embrace.
What would be the least compatible C3 use in the middle of Belmont?
I think C3, the most, I guess, the most concern we typically hear expressed from neighborhoods with C3 is outside storage, screening of that, just the aesthetics. There is the ability to have warehousing, distribution, things that maybe have a little bit more traffic associated with them. There is the ability to have light manufacturing, but it's supposed to be clean industry. It's not supposed to be something that presents a nuisance. But outside storage, I think, is probably what we hear the most concern about from a neighborhood basis.
So the neighborhood could meet and approach planning, which then would perhaps come before us to approve higher standards regarding vegetative screening.
We have put in place over the last few years more restrictive requirements for screening for outside storage in the C3 district. Certainly we could enhance that. We could look at an overlay if the neighborhood wanted to pursue that for that commercial core. There are alternatives we could look at.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Brooke.
Thank you very much. Ms. Morris, I think my line of questioning is the same as Councilman Spencer's. I've seen cases where people have gotten zoning because of one reason, and then all of a sudden, 3 or 4 years later, something comes up that's allowed underneath that classification that horrifies people, and since that zoning has already been approved, at that time it becomes awfully difficult. At this stage, I'm leaning towards, because the neighbors that live around there seem to approve it. But can you think of some other example of some onerous things that may go in there once the C3 is approved that the neighborhood may not find appealing?
Councilman Wu, there are activities that are permitted in C3, but they're limited by other areas of the code. Adult entertainment is permitted under C3, but there are other restrictions in place that are going to limit that from occurring here. Depending on lot assembly and what a property owner tried to pursue as far as land use, there are a number of unknowns that could occur, certainly. C3 is our most intense commercial zoning district. The next step up is industrial. So there are a number of things that a neighborhood could potentially find objectionable. If you're looking at, we can't really restrict the land uses if the zoning is put in place, so our alternative would be to try to, steer the site design and the aesthetics.
Okay. Because one case that comes to mind was, I remember that there were some people that wanted to build condos right near the 17th Street trestle. And all the people that lived in that area objected strongly because everybody in that area is single resident dwelling. But what happened years ago was there was a dentist who lived near the railroad trestle that came to the city and said, could he see patients in his home? And because of that, the city changed the zoning, which now will allow a high-rise condominium to go up there whenever somebody finds it feasible to build one. So that's my only apprehension, but if the neighbors seem to, be okay with it and they've all agreed with it, then I'm certainly willing to go with it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Ms. Morris. Before we go to the next item, let me announce the results. Congratulations to David Mayo, Miranda Sword, Whitney Volts, and Ed Wonders. So those are our four new ones. Two are staying. We have two new members, Whitney Volts and Ed Wonders. And for those that did not make it, we hope that you will continue to be interested and apply in the future. So thank you all for your comments.